in the news. This is Chicago Week in Review with Joel Weisman.
For years, he made deals with presidents. This week, he cut a deal for himself. Dan Rostenkowski pleading guilty to federal corruption charges, heading to prison. Meanwhile, heavyweight champ Mike Tyson accused of sexual assault in a Chicago nightclub, amid questions about the possible motives of his accuser. More local details emerge about the Unabomber suspect Ted Kaczynski and his Chicago past. Finally, controversy over a fatal police shooting of a deaf man on the Stevenson Expressway. Good evening. I'm Joel Weisman, and joining us are Chuck Neubauer of the Chicago Sun-Times, Janita Poe of the Chicago Tribune, Jim Goodis of All News 67 WMAQ Radio, and Eric Zorn, also of the Tribune. First tonight, the guilty plea of Dan Rostenkowski, blasting the government for selective prosecution. The once powerful chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee pleads guilty to 2 counts of felony mail fraud. Judge Norma Holloway Johnson scolding him for betraying the public trust and disgracing Congress. Rostenkowski will likely spend his 17-month term in a minimum security prison. Chuck Neubauer, what did you think of Dan Rostenkowski's remarks after sentencing? Not much contrition there.
No, he was unrepentant, which is kind of, you know, the way he's gone through his whole life and his whole career. He does say what he thinks.
Well, now you are one of the 2 reporters that unearthed most of the facts that made the basis of this indictment, and now that he's sentenced, how do you feel as a reporter?
Well, it's sad, I mean, to see someone who was once that prominent in that. I mean, you have to go away to prison like he's having to do. I mean, it's just...
But there's no question that you felt he had this result coming, and then some.
No, I think he had this result coming. I think 17 months is a real... It's a stiff sentence for a guy who was once that prominent. I'm not one of these people yelling that he should, you know, go away for 5 years or anything like that.
And for viewers who may have forgotten the details, what are the highlights of the disclosures that you made in the Sun-Times?
Well, we reported that he had loaded his payroll with people, you know, who were tenants of his buildings or double-dipping city employees, what the government called ghosts, that he, you know, people were doing political work for him. We also reported he used taxpayer money to buy him and his family some cars. He also used taxpayer money to buy expensive gifts for some of his friends, antique chairs and that kind of thing. And there was another thing which the government had started before we got into the Rostenkowski investigation business of that he embezzled money from the House Post Office.
And of these crimes, have there been other congressmen and members of Congress that have been similarly guilty? Or is he stand out because of the sheer numbers of times he violated these laws?
I think he stands out because of the sheer numbers. I think there may be other people who had their staffers do an occasional political deed or something like that. He had people on his payroll who never had to come to the office. I mean, they were doing, you know, his personal business, cleaning his house or whatever.
Eric Zorn, do you think that his statement that he was selectively prosecuted, that they were just out for him and none of the other violators makes any sense?
My guess is that there's some truth to that he was a big fish, but I don't buy into any of this notion that's been floated around that oh, the rules changed on him, the poor guy, you know, he came in during one culture and he got caught up in it because it was never right what he was doing. It's never right to pad the payroll of people who aren't doing any work. It's never right to buy personal cars.
But they didn't prosecute people for padding the payroll when he first began.
Prosecute people. That was just wrong. That was a wrong thing to do then. It was a wrong thing to do before they passed all the laws. I mean, it's the thing is, if with someone who has the integrity that you want someone to have who's in that kind of office would know that it's wrong. It's just like if people talk about, oh, the rules change about one's attitudes toward minorities or something like that. No, the rules, what's more and less acceptable and what you can get away with changes, but what's right and wrong don't change in this context, I don't think. And that's why I don't buy this.
Do you think the people of Chicago feel relieved that Dan Rostenkowski will now be behind bars?
Well, I don't know if they're relieved. It depends on who you're talking to. I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, this was a powerful figure for them, and it's someone they looked up to, and he had always been there. I mean, this is 3 decades we're talking about. But I wanted to say something about what Eric was saying. I think that that for Rostenkowski, this is not. He really does believe that the rules have changed. I think in his mind, you know, when he came in, the rules were different in that
It's really the enforcement of the rules was different.
Right. I mean, I just think it's something that for elected officials, over time, you become comfortable with your position. And I think he doesn't see it as the taxpayers' money. It's the money.
Jim Goodis, do you think people will remember him first as a criminal and secondly as someone who did a lot for Chicago? And will some of the good deeds actually be overrun by the bad ones?
Good deeds will probably be remembered by individuals. Anyone who was helped by Rostenkowski individually. Certainly Mayor Daley says he'd like Rostenkowski to be remembered for all the things he did, but I think most people are going to remember the last and the latest. It's the way people's memories tend to be, and most of the stuff on Rostenkowski lately has been on this, and I think most people know him now.
What about the millions of dollars that have come to Chicago? New expressways, new public projects, all sorts of things.
But you have so many projects and so many things coming in. Yes, that was yesterday's news. This is today's news, and people tend to stick with today's news.
You're always remembered by your last act.
Usually remembered by the last act, and especially when it's someone this prominent.
Chuck, before we leave this, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of mail fraud. What were the actual things he pleaded guilty to?
Well, he called them technical violations, though he did agree to serve 17 months for them. One was using taxpayer fund to buy some presents for friends, in this case China, and the other one was for padding his payroll at one specific point in time.
And so he can, at least in his own mind, say, well, I never pleaded guilty to any of these other things, therefore I'm not guilty.
Right. He was real vociferous that he didn't want to plead guilty to embezzling from the House Post Office. This was just... He just didn't want to do that.
And what about his argument that he wanted to save his family and his friends from the humiliation of a trial?
Oh, I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, the government has indicted and convicted some close friends of his. I mean, there's a guy who worked for him, worked for Danny personally, who's going to spend 10 months in jail, and this has to be upsetting to him.
How many of you would welcome his return to the public arena after he's served his time?
Well, I was just going to ask Chuck if you think that that's even possible, given the information that's out there.
Well, before you ask Chuck that, tell me if you'd welcome him back. I mean, the man has considerable skills.
I would think probably not at this stage in his life and career.
How about you?
I guess I feel a little differently. I mean, I think he was a very good leader, and I think sometimes that the actions on the side, there's a leadership role and then there's the person, and I separate the two, so I think he was a good leader.
Jim Goodis?
All depends on whether you believe the fact that he was actually doing what everybody else was doing, whether that's forgivable or not. I think at this point, it's a little tough to see Dan Rostenkowski back in any kind of prominent public role.
Chuck?
Oh, I think he might be an advisor to people, but I don't think he's going to run for office. He'll be 70 when he gets out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we have to move on to the case of a 22-year-old Eric Smith, shot to death by Forest View police. A distraught Smith, who is deaf, was confronted by the police on the shoulder of the Stevenson Expressway. Police say Smith was shot after reaching for an officer's gun. His family, though, claims Smith was a victim of excessive police force. Janita, what happened on the Stevenson Expressway, and should this deaf person have died?
Well, right now we really don't know exactly what happened. The family has been talking, and we know their side of the story, but right now there's a task force that is investigating this, so we're really not able to get from police exactly what happened.
Well, Janita, let's assume the police version that he was going for an officer's gun is correct. How do police justify killing a person in that instance as opposed to maiming them?
Well, they say they started by trying to maim him. I mean, he was shot 3 times. He was shot first in the leg, and he didn't slow down. He continued to be aggressive, and they shot again, and they shot the 3rd time to kill. I mean, that's their position. They didn't immediately shoot him in the head or shoot him in the heart.
Did they have any way of knowing that he was deaf at the time?
The indication is no. I mean, police have told us that they did not know that. However, the attorney for Eric Smith has said that he was gesticating, he was making noises, he was grunting, and that would indicate that he was deaf if he wasn't using any words.
Does the family try to talk to them at all? You've talked to the family. Did they try to say, hey, he's deaf or scream?
Yeah, before we talk about that, Eric, explain what happened. Why did they end up on the shoulder of the expressway to begin with?
Well, the family was, Eric was in an argument with his mother. They pulled off at the side of the road. The family member waves down a police officer. When the police arrive, Eric Smith becomes very aggressive, and a fight ensues, and they try to hold him down. He possibly reaches for the gun. We don't know that's true or not. And the police police officer fires the first shot and the subsequent 2 other shots.
And now what about the keys?
Well, they were Eric Smith was in counseling for a previous incident in Washington, D.C., where he saw 2 men shot a police officer and another man. And he was also apparently beaten or hit by police, and so he was distraught over this, and he was in counseling, and he wanted to return to his counselor and was arguing with his mother over whether or not to return. He wanted to take control of the car and drive, and apparently she threw the keys out of the car and didn't want him to go back, and it was a domestic argument. I mean, he was unarmed, and it was a domestic argument, and police arrived at that. How it ended up with this one person dead is, I guess, the big issue.
And of course, you could understand why a person like this would be extremely paranoid of police, having been beaten just previously in Washington.
Correct. And again, being frustrated that he could not communicate to them that he was deaf and could not hear them. I mean, his back was turned to one of the officers. So it's quite possible that the officer said, stop, halt, and he couldn't hear them. His back was turned.
Chuck Neubauer, you're kind of a cynical guy. We've had lots of police brutality cases over the years. What's your inclination? Does this sound like a plausible story from a police standpoint?
I also have a brother who's a policeman. Yeah, I mean, they're just real hard to sort out. I really, and I watch it on television. One night it's one way, and the other night it's the other way as to what happened.
So you have no opinion on it?
No.
But you'll rely on the police investigating the police to make up your mind?
No.
You won't? Okay. Jim Goodis, how do you feel about the version of the facts?
We'd sure like to have more facts on this, but it seems a little tough that simply going for a gun, reaching for a gun, would be enough to warrant fatal force in this case. But again, until you get the whole facts and the whole story, and you're only hearing it from the police right now, hard to say. But it seems a little tough that simply the act of going for a gun. Now, if he actually had his hand on the gun, maybe that would be something else. But simply going for it, you don't really know whether he's going for it or not.
Now, Eric, were you the one who said before the show, don't they use mace anymore?
Well, isn't there pepper spray or mace or something short of lethal force?
The grandmother apparently asked the police to use mace. So she has said that she told them, mace him, don't try to shoot him. And she also was shouting that he was deaf. This is her story again.
Any reason to doubt that story?
No, I mean, police.
Do the police contend that they did not know he was deaf?
They're saying they did not know.
So they never heard the grandmother, even though the grandmother summoned them over?
That's what they're saying.
And how will this, what is the process now in sorting this all out?
Well, the investigation is continuing. They're talking to witnesses. There were a lot of witnesses because this happened during rush hour. So there are about 15 people who have been questioned, and also they've talked to the 2 cops who were at the scene, and hopefully next week we'll have a report.
And what is the consensus of the witnesses?
According to police, the witnesses have agreed with the police that this man was very aggressive and that he reached for one of the officers' guns and possibly even fired the gun. That's not clear also.
And the parent and grandparents say that he never reached for the gun?
They say he never reached for the gun.
That he was just resisting?
Exactly. That he was just, the officer actually, he did head towards the officer, but the officer was aggressive in return and also called him names and trying to subdue him. And of course he couldn't hear that, but maybe the parents were upset, the family was upset.
Are the parents going to file some kind of a lawsuit?
They're filing a suit in the first case, the Washington, D.C. incident. They're still, the attorney's still looking into a lawsuit for this one.
Well, it's a very sad story. Another story, Mike Tyson. He may be in trouble again, this time stemming from a Chicago nightclub visit. He's accused of sexually assaulting a Gary, Indiana woman at the Click Club on South Michigan Avenue. Nightclub officials claim that Tyson was in full view, surrounded by bodyguards at all times during his nightclub visit. The woman claims Tyson assaulted her in a private room. The champ is on probation for an Indiana rape conviction. He's been ordered to stay close to his Ohio home pending results of the Chicago investigation. What supposedly happened according to this woman's complaint?
According to the woman's complaint, apparently...
First of all, who is the woman?
The woman is a 25-year-old woman from Gary. We don't know her name, obviously. It hasn't been released. And what we know from what bits and pieces we've been able to gather, apparently she was at the Click the night that Mike Tyson was there, and there's no dispute that Tyson was indeed at the Click that night down at 23rd in Michigan. Apparently she claims that Tyson came up to her, wanted to meet her, apparently kissed her on the cheek and bit her, apparently. And then there was some groping going on, apparently in some kind of a private room. Now, as you just mentioned, the management came out, had a news conference, said that they had kept Mike Tyson in full view. Security hadn't seen him all night. Nothing went wrong. They even brought out someone they claimed was a coworker and a friend of the accuser, and she came out and also said that she believed Mike Tyson and not her friend. Now, this woman wouldn't give her last name. It was eventually found out by some reporters, and we eventually tracked that down.
Why was Tyson here to begin with?
Tyson was in town. You know, that's a good question. That I am not sure exactly why he was in town. That I've not been able to ascertain, actually. But he is, you know, he is now, of course, back in Ohio at home, and a lot of questions about this case. One thing that's very interesting is that police have been unable to talk to this woman since she made her first complaint by phone. She called the complaint into police and apparently then went to some hospital to receive treatment. And then from there, the police have been unable to get a hold of her, and they haven't been able to talk to her about her accusations. So the police say until they can talk to her...
So she's never actually signed a complaint?
Apparently not. She only talked to them by phone, and until the police can talk to her more, they say their hands are tied. There's really nothing they can do.
Now, of course, there's a lot of public discussion about this case, and of course, it's divided. Some people say, oh, sure, he did this, you know, he's a known lecher, and other people say, oh, well, he's a standing target to be shaken down by people who would want to get money for making these charges to then drop them. What about the club? The club also might be responsible in a case like this. So it would be in their interest to say that he was...
Well, it's very interesting. In the news release that they gave out that afternoon during the news conference, they noted that they were working with Tyson on a deal to bring a children's center to Chicago and a kids club here. So they were working with Tyson. They were in a relationship with Tyson. So there's some question as to perhaps their motive, although, you know, it was interesting that in the same time they're talking about Mike Tyson's innocence, in the same thing they say they're working with Mike Tyson.
You know what strikes me about this, though, is that this has something very much in common with this Eric Smith case, which is that there've got to be a ton of witnesses. You got a whole nightclub full of people, and you got a whole expressway full of people. I mean, that when the witnesses are all heard from, we're going to know whether Mike Tyson was mysteriously absent for 15 minutes at the same time this woman was absent. That in some ways, at this point, there's just not enough known to make any conclusion about what Tyson
And how long does it take to get it known? When did this happen?
This happened Sunday night.
So we're almost a week in.
And the only thing about that one thing is in a crowded nightclub, though, even if it is Mike Tyson, how long can you keep your eye on one person? Especially if you're with someone else. You're going to run into some trouble if you're with your date and your eye's on Mike Tyson and not on your date.
Someone like that, he's not going to fade off into the woodwork. I don't think. I mean, it's...
Well, she claimed this happened in a private room, right?
She's claiming it happened in a private room.
They went to another room.
Right. The club is saying that even if they went into a private room, they had people watching them.
Are there private rooms in the
There
club?
are private rooms, but they say that there were so many people in there, and he was, of course, as Eric's pointing out, being followed by so many people and being watched by security that he was never out of sight.
And what is Tyson's group saying? They want this thing up or down on the charge? Let's get it over?
Well, Tyson has had no comment. Basically, through his managers and stuff, he's had no comment. Alan Dershowitz, his lawyer, came out and basically said, well, this is just an example of somebody digging for gold. And that's about the only comment I've heard from anybody related to Mike Tyson on this whole thing.
What about you say she went to a hospital. Isn't there an availability of a hospital report which might have shown?
Well, if we knew which hospital, and a lot of hospitals, unless you have a name, aren't going to release the information. So at this point, at least I have not been able to...
Unless you have authorization from the patient.
Absolutely. And if you can't find the patient, it's hard to get authorization.
Well, now, the patient does have a lawyer. And what has the lawyer said?
Well, the lawyer is saying basically that he's giving the allegations. He says that Mike Tyson tried to kiss his client. He says Mike Tyson bit his client, groped his client, took her back to a private room, and he's sticking with the story.
As little regard as I have for Mike Tyson, I think there's something about this that is really, I mean, that we really should wait till she filed. I mean, there at least should be a report filed.
Well, that brings us to another question. Is the media being responsible here in jumping all over this case without a signed complaint? And having no more knowledge than what the nightclub says and what this woman's lawyer says.
I think we should be extremely skeptical of these charges. We probably have some duty to talk about them, to talk about these news conferences and so on. But in terms of asking the did he or didn't he question at this point, like I say, I mean, Mike Tyson, I have extremely little respect for him, but even Mike Tyson deserves, I think, more of a benefit of the doubt than we're giving him at this point, given that this woman hasn't even been willing to file a formal complaint.
Are we handling this story responsibly? What do you want to know? What's the next question you have as a reporter?
I want to know if the police are going to charge him or not. I mean, that's, because it does become a circus with these, well, she's my friend and she's lying. It's like, well, you know what I mean? You wonder, people come out of the woodwork on these things.
And how long does it take to actually affect the charge?
I would think they'd be able to investigate in a couple of weeks.
Maybe even sooner.
Yeah.
What about his parole and or his probation? What happens if he in fact is charged?
If he is charged, there's a couple of options. They can either put him on some kind of electronic home monitoring, or they could send him back to prison, and he has 4 more years to serve. So he could go back to prison for another 4 years if, in fact, these allegations turn out to be true.
Well, I guarantee you that everyone in the media is watching the case, and it will be well reported on whatever the police decide. In the meantime, there are more Chicago details emerging about the Unabomber suspect, Ted Kaczynski. He was fired from his job in Lombard by his own brother in 1978 for harassing a former girlfriend and co-worker. Meanwhile, more former classmates remember that Kaczynski liked to blow things up as a youth. Eric Zorin, you had a column about a lot of kids blowing things up as youth, so you don't put much credence in the fact that just because he did it, he's the right guy.
Well, what I said in my column was that the fact that this young man, that Ted Kaczynski used to like to blow things up when he was in high school, proves conclusively that he was a young man. That just about all of us used to do that, and that the kinds of aberrant behaviors that you can go back and point to and say, well, gee, look at what he was like then. There are a lot of people who are misfits. There are a lot of math geniuses who are extremely withdrawn, who are socially awkward, who have trouble relating. There are a lot of people living out in the mountains by themselves, like Thoreau, who don't run amok. And Ted Kaczynski seems to me to be, insane, and not a genius by the kind of standards of the use.
Why? I think he is a genius by virtue of his IQ and education and all those things.
He happens to be extremely good at very theoretical mathematics. Nothing else about his life suggests any kind of
genius, just in one area.
Almost like an idiot savant in a way, it seems like to me. And also, the other thing is that all these people are praising him up and down on the internet, saying, we must listen to his message and so on. Remember, he promised that he wasn't going to do any more damage when they published his manifesto, and they've allegedly found live bombs inside this hut that he lived in.
So he had no credibility.
Indicating that he was a hypocrite as well as a psycho killer.
But could have been for the rabbits, though. He had a rabbit problem.
And I should say allegedly, in front of all those sentences. But it's looking, I guess, on Friday they found...
Give me some more of your theories about young men blowing up things. What did you blow up as a young man?
We used to blow up tin cans, waste baskets, little models. We'd build little model boats and cars and blow them up.
And did you ever get caught? Did you ever...
No.
What did you do when you were a young man? What kind of things did you blow up?
Well, the closest thing I think I ever did was, you take those tennis ball cans and you stick a tennis ball in there and you stick a little hole in the bottom and get some lighter fluid and send that thing flying about 500 feet. Can't say I ever blew anything up, though.
How about you, Chuck?
I never blew anything up.
Chuck, you were always walking the straight and narrow, and that's why you hold all these politicians to that same line, huh?
Right.
What about the disclosures, Eric, about the fact that his own brother, who actually supposedly turned him in, also fired him from his job?
Well, he was working at this the foam rubber plant, I guess, Foam Cutting Express, something like that, and he was harassing the woman that he was dating there, and his brother, who was his supervisor, had to fire him. And I guess this caused a temporary estrangement in the family, but later on they worked that out, and I suppose they're estranged again at this point.
And you would attach what significance to this in regard to that being the groundwork for becoming a Unabomber?
Well, the investigators, I don't think, attach particular significance to it. They look at the entire pattern of this man's life and the social maladjustment that took place, and I think that's just a small part of it. But it didn't seem to spark the Unabombing spree.
Well, are we being chauvinistic in having headlines about things like that, that he was once fired from his job here and that he once blew things up as a child, and just trying to stake out our Chicago part of the story?
Well, to some degree, although I think it's very interesting how someone turns out the way this man turned out. And I think it's going to be, the more we learn about this man, the more we learn about the kinds of things in his background that may have pushed him from being just sort of
since you're dismissing the early pyrotechnics, what things early in his background are you concerned with?
Well, there's some talk about the way his mother, she worked on him a lot with his academics, but realized that he was socially awkward and didn't pay attention to that part of his development at all. I think those kind of things are things that maybe we can learn from. That's the hope.
Let's talk about something else we might learn from. All of you are familiar with that 7-year-old girl who went down in the plane crash. It's a national story. We don't usually do those on this show. Chuck Newbar, who's to blame? What can we learn from that?
Oh, I don't think she should have been up and
Who's
doing
fault?
this stunt.
Parents?
Parents, the media.
Parents and the media, how can you let somebody who can't even drive a car fly a plane? Just amazes me.
But yet, if she were coming to Chicago, you'd do all kinds of stories about the fact that she was setting a record and be at the airport, right?
Well, news is news.
How about it, Janita?
I agree. Parents and the media. This girl couldn't even reach the pedals. She had to have special apparatus to help her reach the pedals. She was just too young.
And what should we do? Stop reporting on young record setters?
Well, I
only
mean,
report on old record setters, or
the
what?
parents wanted this attention. I mean, I think they were, ambitious, and I think we have to follow. We're the media. I mean, if they bring attention to something like this, we have to report it.
When you call them ambitious, what does that mean? They're selfish. They want to exploit their daughter.
Well, they were ambitious for her daughter. I mean, the child should be the ambitious one, but I think at the age of 7, I can't imagine that, she wanted all of this herself. I think her parents were pushing her.
Eric Zorn.
Parents, flight instructor, and television.
Oh, but not newspapers.
No, newspapers ignored this story until they got. I did a database search. The Tribune did a little tiny photo caption. The Sun-Times did a tiny brief. New York Times, Washington Post, Daily Times, Wall Street Journal all ignored it until the crash. It was TV. It was ABC giving them the camera. Every stop, all the TV cameras were there, turning a nothing story into something, giving them, fueling them on, having that flight
It certainly became a legitimate and unfortunately sad story. We're out of time. For Eric Zorn and Janita Poe, Jim Gudis and Chuck Neubauer, thanks for joining us. I'm Joel Weisman, and we'll see you on the next edition of Chicago Week in Review. Good evening.